The first thing I noticed was the quiet. It was a Monday morning, just after 6:30. I had a paper cup of gas station coffee in one hand and my badge in the other. When I opened the door to the server room, I expected the usual low hum, the steady, familiar sound of fans moving air across racks of equipment. That sound had been part of my mornings for almost 9 years. Instead, there was nothing. Just the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead and the faint smell of dust that settles when machines stop moving. I stood there for a few seconds, coffee in my hand, listening. That room had been my second home. I'm Mark Ellison, 51 years old, Senior Database Administrator for High Plains Infrastructure out of Oklahoma City. We handle payroll for a little over 9,000 construction workers across Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, and North Texas. If our system fails, people don't just get annoyed, they don't get paid. I set my coffee on the metal workbench near the backup terminal and checked the status panel. Systems were technically online, but something had been shut down overnight, cleanly, intentionally. I already knew what that meant. The meeting had been scheduled for 8 a.m. The calendar invite was vague. Operational realignment discussion. When I walked into the conference room, I saw Daniel Mercer sitting at the head of the table, Vice President of Operations, early 40s, crisp shirt, tablet in front of him. He tapped the screen twice before looking up. Beside him sat Lila Grant from HR. She kept her hands folded on a yellow legal pad. "Mark," Daniel said, smiling in a way that felt rehearsed. "We're modernizing payroll." I nodded once. "What does that mean?" He leaned back slightly. "It means we're transitioning to a more agile solution. Something more intuitive, less dependent." He paused there. Dependent. Then he added almost casually, "My nephew just completed his MBA. He's built an advanced Excel-based payroll system that can replace the current database structure." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him. Excel for 9,000 construction workers. Daniel kept talking. "This new model reduces processing time by 50%. It's streamlined, cloud-based, and it eliminates unnecessary overhead." Unnecessary overhead. That was me. I folded my hands on the table, calm, measured. "When is the transition scheduled?" I asked. "This Friday, after your final payroll run." There it was. Friday. I felt my jaw tighten for half a second, then I relaxed it. His nephew, Tyler Mercer, walked in right on cue. Late 20s, clean suit, confident stride. He set his laptop down like he was unveiling something important. "Mr. Ellison," he said, reaching out his hand, "I've reviewed your current system. It's impressive, but outdated." I shook his hand, firm, brief. He opened his laptop and rotated it toward me. Rows and columns, tabs labeled by state, pivot tables, conditional formatting, macros. It handles multi-state tax codes, prevailing wage adjustments, union differentials, equipment reimbursements, all automated. I studied the sheet without reacting. In Oklahoma alone, we manage over 600 prevailing wage classifications. Rates vary by county, by contract type, by funding source. Some crews cross state lines mid-week. Hazard pay triggers based on GPS proximity to certain zones. Overtime rules change after the 8th hour in one state, the 10th in another. None of that fits neatly into a single lookup formula. "Have you tested this with live production data?" I asked. "Sample datasets," Tyler said confidently. "And theoretical scenarios." "Theoretical scenarios." Lila cleared her throat gently. "We'll need you to provide documentation and system access credentials before Friday, for continuity." I nodded slowly. Documentation. Most of the real knowledge wasn't written anywhere. It was in exception handling scripts, archive recovery paths, small fixes applied over years. I knew which warehouse time clocks duplicated entries after midnight, which county tax file from Arkansas sometimes inverted decimal placements, which union contract required meal penalty pay after exactly 5 hours without a logged break. You don't put that in a textbook. "When is my last day?" I asked. Friday afternoon, Daniel said. After payroll transmission. I gave one small nod. All right. Tyler looked relieved. Daniel relaxed back in his chair. As I stood to leave, I said one thing. When the system miscalculates, don't rerun the batch until you identify the error source. Duplicate entries cascade. Tyler smiled politely. I've built safeguards. I didn't argue. I walked out of that conference room quietly. The hum in the server room hadn't been an accident. They'd already begun shutting down pieces of what I built. And Friday was 3 days away. I went back to my desk, turned on my monitor, and opened the transaction logs. Then I started documenting, and I waited. Wednesday morning felt normal on the surface. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and powdered creamer. The fluorescent lights flickered once before settling. Outside my office window, I could see a line of flatbed trucks idling near the yard gate, exhaust drifting into the cool air. Inside, payroll week was moving forward like it always did. Except this time, someone was watching me. Tyler pulled a chair up beside my desk with his laptop open. He didn't say much at first, just typed, observed, occasionally nodded as if confirming something he'd already decided. I began the midweek audit process. Step 1. Verify raw time uploads from all 38 job sites. Step 2. Reconcile equipment usage logs against crew assignments. Step 3. Run preliminary tax withholding simulations for multi-state workers. I moved through it steadily, no rush, no commentary. Tyler finally leaned forward. Why do you manually verify the Kansas prevailing wage table every cycle? Because the state database occasionally mislabels 2 counties, I said without looking up. Has since 2020. About 3% of classifications come through with swapped region codes. He paused. Can't that just be corrected in the source system? It's a government database, I replied. We don't control it. He typed something into his notes. A few minutes later, he asked, why not automate the hazard pay trigger? I did, I said, but GPS feeds sometimes lag during severe weather, so I run a cross-check against site supervisor reports. He sat back. That seems redundant. It prevents lawsuits. He didn't respond to that. By Thursday afternoon, he was confident enough to begin importing real payroll data into his Excel model. I stood behind him, not hovering, just present. He selected the CSV file from the timekeeping server. 9,000 employee records, multiple states, multiple union contracts, equipment charges, reimbursements. When he clicked Enable Content, the spreadsheet hesitated. The fan inside his laptop grew louder. Cells began populating, then flickering. Circular reference warning. He frowned, clicked through it. The sheet lagged again. Conditional formatting began highlighting entire columns in red. It's just recalculating, he said. I nodded once. What he hadn't accounted for was cascade logic. In our system, prevailing wage overrides trigger secondary tax adjustments. Union overtime rules can supersede state overtime rules under specific contracts. Equipment reimbursements deduct from gross before some tax calculations, but after others. That kind of logic doesn't live in simple VLOOKUP formulas. After about 3 minutes, Excel stopped responding entirely. Tyler tapped the keyboard. Waited. Then force closed the program. It's probably just the file size, he said. Possibly, I replied. He reopened it, this time disabling some macros. The totals column recalculated. I saw it immediately. One employee listed as earning $930 per hour, another showing negative overtime. He scrolled quickly past it. Formatting glitch, he muttered. I didn't correct him. By 5:30 that evening, he said he was ready for Friday's full run. I finished my documentation packet, printed the system architecture overview, password vault export, backup restoration guide, archive log map. Most of it he wouldn't understand yet, but it was there. Friday morning arrived cool and quiet. The bank transmission deadline was noon sharp. After that, deposits wouldn't hit accounts until Monday. Tyler arrived early. I was already at my desk. He connected his laptop to the main workstation display. His Excel model filled the screen. Ready? He asked. I gathered the few personal items from my drawer. A small framed photo of my old pickup, a ceramic mug from a job site in Tulsa, a notebook I kept for anomalies. Go ahead, I said. He initiated the full calculation run. Rows filled in rapidly. Error values began appearing across multiple tabs. He adjusted one formula. More errors surfaced. He recalculated again. This time, the totals column spiked dramatically. I saw Social Security numbers populating in the pay rate field. He hadn't locked the column mapping during import. Tyler, I said calmly, don't rerun the entire batch yet. He was already clicking. Recalculate. Duplicate entries began stacking in the background data sheet. He didn't notice. By 10:45 a.m., employees began accessing their pay stubs through the portal preview. My phone buzzed. Then again. I didn't answer at first. Then I glanced down. A text from Ramon in Amarillo. Mark, my pay stub says I owe the company $3,400. Another from Denise in Little Rock. It says I worked 200 hours last week. Then one from Carl, a foreman in Tulsa. According to this, I make $811 an hour. That'd be nice. I set the phone face down. Tyler's screen was now showing tax withholdings in the millions. The federal deduction line alone exceeded quarterly averages. That's not possible, he whispered. He adjusted a tax formula. The net pay column went negative for nearly half the workforce. 11:32 a.m. The bank validation system attempted to process the payroll file. 11:47 a.m. Error notification. File rejected. Invalid routing entries. Duplicate transaction IDs. Inconsistent withholding totals. Tyler stared at the screen. I stood quietly behind him. He turned slowly. Can you take a look? I met his eyes for a moment. My last day is today, I said evenly. Lila appeared in the doorway, pale. Mark, she said softly. Daniel needs to see you. I picked up my notebook and walked down the hall. Then I waited. Daniel's office was quieter than usual. The blinds were half closed, cutting the morning light into narrow bands across his desk. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled up. His tablet sat untouched. That alone told me enough. Lila closed the door behind me. Daniel didn't start with small talk. The bank rejected the file, he said. It flagged the submission as potentially fraudulent. I nodded once. How bad is it? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. I pulled the small notebook from my hand and set it on the desk. Based on what I saw before I left the workstation, I said calmly, you have duplicate batch IDs, corrupted withholding totals, and mismatched account routing numbers. If those transmit incorrectly, the bank's compliance system freezes everything. Daniel leaned forward. Everything? Operating accounts, credit lines, payroll clearing. Lila inhaled quietly. Daniel ran a hand over his face. Tyler said it was a formatting issue. It isn't, I said. There was no edge in my voice. Just fact. Excel reprocessed the same import twice. That duplicates transaction records. It also appears the column mapping shifted during one of the recalculations. He stared at me. And can it be fixed? Yes. That was the first shift. Not emotional, not dramatic, just clarity. How long? He asked. That depends. He waited. If the raw payroll data is intact and hasn't been overwritten, recovery takes 6 to 8 hours. If it's been deleted without archive access, it could take significantly longer. Daniel looked toward Lila. She didn't speak. I need to know something, I continued. Did Tyler delete the original import file when he reran the batch? Silence. Daniel pressed his intercom. Send Tyler in. Tyler walked in quickly, laptop in hand. His earlier confidence was gone. Shoulders tighter, movements faster. Did you overwrite the raw CSV file when you re-imported? I asked directly. He hesitated. I cleared the sheet and reloaded it. Did you back up the original? I assume the system auto-saved. I nodded once. Daniel's jaw tightened. Answer the question. Tyler swallowed. No. I closed my notebook slowly. That means your only intact version is likely in the server transaction archives, I said, if those logs haven't been disrupted. Daniel turned to me fully now. What do you need? I spoke carefully. Step 1. Immediate suspension of all payroll transmissions. Step 2. Written authorization to access archived system logs. Step 3. Full administrative privileges restored. Tyler started to say something about rebuilding the spreadsheet. Daniel raised a hand to stop him. I continued. I also need clarity on my employment status. The room went quiet. Daniel's voice was lower now. What are you asking? My termination was effective after payroll transmission, I said. Payroll has not transmitted successfully. Lila looked at Daniel. I held steady eye contact. This is not a negotiation, I said calmly. It's a procedural fact. Silence stretched for several seconds. Finally, Daniel exhaled. You're reinstated, effective immediately, temporary basis. Written confirmation, I said. Lila nodded quickly. I'll draft it now. Tyler stood there, laptop still open, as if waiting for instruction. I turned to him. For now, close the spreadsheet. Do not attempt further edits. He hesitated, then closed it. I walked back toward the server room. The hum had returned partially, but several systems were still offline. Inside, the air felt cooler, familiar. I logged into the archive server. Transaction logs were still intact. Good. I began tracing the duplicate entries. Every time Tyler reran the batch, a new transaction ID was generated without clearing the prior one. That's what triggered the fraud detection. Next, I checked the withholding calculation module. Circular references had overwritten portions of the tax adjustment table. That explained the inflated federal totals. I worked methodically. No rush, no commentary. By mid-afternoon, employees across 4 states were calling HR. Some had negative net pay listed in the portal. Others showed 5-digit hourly rates. Union representatives had begun emailing. I didn't read them. Step by step. Restore original import file from archive. Purge duplicate transaction IDs. Rebuild tax calculation table from last verified backup. Reconcile equipment deductions manually for flagged records. At 5:40 p.m., Daniel stepped quietly into the server room. How does it look? He asked. Recoverable, I said. He nodded slowly. Outside the window, I could see workers leaving the yard in small groups. Some looked confused, some frustrated. Payroll wasn't just numbers. It was groceries, rent, child support, fuel. Daniel stood there for a moment longer. Then he said something softer. Mark, if this gets fixed, we need to discuss terms. I didn't look up from the monitor. We will, I said. Then I continued rebuilding the system. And I waited. By Tuesday morning, the situation had moved beyond inconvenience. 3 state labor offices had requested clarification on the failed payroll submission. The bank had placed a temporary review hold on the company's primary operating account. 2 major highway projects were already slowing because crews weren't willing to work without confirmed deposits. I was back in my old chair, but everything felt different. Not tense, clear. When systems break at this scale, emotion is a distraction. Process matters. I wrote 3 lines at the top of a yellow legal pad. Stabilize the data. Reconcile the numbers. Document every correction. No shortcuts. The archive restoration finished just after 7 a.m. I rebuilt the payroll batch using the verified raw time file from the previous Thursday night snapshot, the one stored on the secondary server Tyler didn't know existed. He'd been working off the live mirrored file. That's where the corruption began. By mid-morning, I had isolated the damage. The Excel imports had done 3 things: duplicated transaction identifiers across multiple states, corrupted federal withholding multipliers, misaligned employee ID columns during a resort. The last one explained the pay stubs that listed Social Security numbers as hourly rates. I didn't point that out to anyone. Facts speak for themselves when they're organized. Daniel stopped by again around 10:30. His tone was different now. No corporate polish, just fatigue. The union rep is outside, he said. He's demanding a written timeline. I'll have one by noon, I replied. He nodded and left. At 11:15, I sent a preliminary report to the bank's compliance department, clean file structure, reconciled totals. Explanation of duplicate batch rejection, no excuses, just corrected numbers. Then I turned to the compensation issue. Because here's the part that mattered most. Even once payroll transmitted successfully, workers had already lost 2 business days. Some had automatic mortgage drafts scheduled, some had child support withdrawals, some had equipment lease payments tied to direct deposit confirmation. If we only fixed the base payroll, we would still be wrong. So I ran an impact report. For each employee, I calculated lost access window, any overdraft risk based on average balance trends, scheduled automatic withdrawals tied to payroll date. Then I added a temporary inconvenience credit, small, clean, documented. Daniel came in as I was finishing the summary. "You're adding additional pay?" he asked carefully. "Yes." "That wasn't discussed." "It should have been." He watched me for a moment. "How much will it cost?" "Less than the labor board fines," I said. He didn't argue. That was the second shift. By late afternoon, the corrected payroll file was ready for retransmission. Before sending it, I printed the reconciliation summary. Every change, every restored log entry, every deleted duplicate. I handed a copy to Daniel. "Read page 4, I said. He did. It listed the exact timestamps of the duplicate Excel imports, the moment the raw file was overwritten, the cascading error sequence, no commentary attached, just time and data. He closed the folder slowly. "Was this preventable?" he asked. "Yes." Silence filled the office, not heavy, just honest. At 5:58 p.m., I transmitted the corrected file to the bank's secure channel. Then I waited. Transmission accepted, validation complete, no fraud flags, no rejections. Deposits scheduled for 6 a.m. release. I leaned back in the chair. Outside, the yard lights were turning on, trucks parked in neat rows, quiet. Daniel stood in the doorway again. "It's done?" he asked. "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "We'll need to address structural decisions." I met his eyes. "We will." He hesitated. "Tyler thinks the spreadsheet can still be salvaged." I didn't smile. I didn't react. "That's a separate discussion," I said evenly, because now we weren't talking about fixing a file. We were talking about defining responsibility. And that conversation would need to happen in a room with the door closed. Then I turned back to the monitor and began drafting the formal audit report. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 9 a.m. Executive Conference Room. Glass walls, long walnut table, coffee already poured. I arrived 5 minutes early with a printed binder under my arm. Inside were 3 sections: timeline of system failure, financial exposure summary, corrective actions implemented. No commentary, no opinions, just records. Daniel was already seated. Lila sat to his right. Tyler came in last, carrying his laptop but not opening it this time. I took a seat across from them and placed the binder on the table. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mark, we appreciate the recovery effort." I nodded once. He continued. "We need to determine how this happened and what we do moving forward." I slid the binder toward him and opened it to the first tab. "Page 2 outlines the initial duplication event," I said calmly. 11:06 a.m. Friday. Excel import initiated without clearing prior batch ID. Daniel read silently. Tyler shifted in his chair. "Page 4 shows the overwrite timestamp of the raw payroll file," I continued. 11:18 a.m. Autosave replaced original dataset. Archive logs captured it. Tyler spoke quickly. "I was attempting to correct formula conflicts. The circular references were causing—" I raised a hand slightly, not to silence him aggressively, just to pause the motion. "This isn't about intention," I said evenly. "It's about sequence." Silence returned. Daniel turned to the financial exposure summary. "Projected regulatory fines?" he asked. Had the incorrect file transmitted successfully. Estimated between $1.8 and $2.4 million across 4 states, plus potential federal audit. And the bank freeze? Triggered by duplicate transaction IDs exceeding fraud threshold. Tyler stared at the table. Daniel looked up at me. "Could the Excel model have worked with modifications?" I considered the question carefully. For a small workforce operating in a single state with consistent wage structures, I said. Possibly. He waited. For a multi-state construction payroll involving prevailing wages, union overlays, hazard differentials, and variable equipment deductions, no. The room was quiet again. No raised voices, no accusation, just structure. Tyler finally spoke, softer this time. I thought simplifying would make it more efficient. It simplified the visible layer, I said, not the underlying rules. Daniel closed the binder. What do you recommend? He asked. That was the moment that mattered, not emotionally, strategically. I answered in steps. First, payroll remains on the SQL system. Second, we implement a formal change control process for any system modification. Third, no live production transitions without parallel testing on real historical data. Daniel nodded slowly. And your role? I report directly to the Chief Information Officer moving forward, I said. Operational influence cannot override system integrity. Lila wrote that down. Tyler looked up briefly. There was no resentment in his face now, just realization. Daniel leaned back. Approved, he said quietly. Then he added, You'll receive a revised contract this afternoon. Compensation adjusted accordingly. I inclined my head slightly. The meeting ended without ceremony. As I stood to leave, Tyler spoke once more. I didn't understand how layered it was. I paused at the door. Most systems look simple from the outside, I said. That's usually a sign they're working. I left the room. No victory, no anger, just alignment restored. Back in the server room, the hum was steady again. I placed the binder copy in the locked cabinet. Then I sat down and reviewed the next payroll calendar, because systems don't stay healthy by accident, and this wasn't the last time someone would try to simplify something they didn't fully see. Then I waited. Friday morning was quiet again, not the unsettling quiet from before, just the normal early stillness of a building before phones start ringing. I was in the server room by 6:15 a.m., reviewing the deposit confirmations. The bank's secure portal showed all 9,000 transactions cleared. No flags, no reversals, no exceptions. I printed the confirmation summary and stapled it to the reconciliation report. At 7 a.m., employees began logging into the portal. My phone buzzed once, then twice. I let it sit for a moment before checking. Looks right this time, appreciate it. That was from Hank in Wichita. Another message from Carla in Fort Smith. Deposit hit, thank you. Short, direct. That's how working crews talk when something matters. At 8:30, Daniel sent a company-wide email, subject line, payroll correction notice. It acknowledged a failed system transition and procedural oversight. It stated that the prior payroll disruption resulted from premature implementation of an untested model. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't defensive, it was factual. Attached to the email was the summary timeline I had prepared, stripped of technical jargon, reduced to sequence and correction steps. By mid-morning, union representatives had withdrawn formal complaints. The state labor boards requested documentation copies, which we provided. No fines were issued. The bank lifted the temporary review status. Everything moved back into alignment. Tyler stopped by the server room just before lunch. He didn't bring his laptop. I wanted to say thank you, he said quietly. I nodded once. He continued. I underestimated the operational complexity. That's common, I replied. He hesitated. Would you be willing to show me how the archive system works? Not to change it, just to understand it. I considered that for a moment. Monday, I said. Bring a notebook. He gave a small nod. Not eager, not defensive, just ready to listen. Later that afternoon, I met with the Chief Information Officer. We reviewed the updated reporting structure. My contract was amended, compensation adjusted upward, system authority clearly defined in writing. There were no speeches, just signatures. As I walked back to my office, a corner space now overlooking the equipment yard, I paused by the window. Cranes were moving again. Concrete trucks lined up in an orderly row. Crews were unloading materials under clear skies. Nothing flashy, just work continuing. I poured a cup of coffee from the small machine Daniel had installed in the office earlier that week, sat down, opened the next week's compliance checklist. Because here's the part most people miss. Recovery isn't the victory, stability is. The truth had already done its work. It was in the logs, in the timestamps, in the bank confirmations, in the revised contracts. There was nothing left to argue, only systems to maintain. I closed the file folder, and the building settled back into its normal rhythm. Saturday morning, I woke up without an alarm. The house was quiet. Sunlight came through the kitchen blinds in narrow lines across the counter. I rinsed out my coffee mug, wiped down the sink, and started a fresh pot. Simple things feel different after a long week. I sat at the small table by the window and reviewed my personal notebook, not the company one, just a habit I've kept for years. I wrote down 3 reminders: maintain independent backups, require parallel testing for any system change, never confuse simpler with stronger. Then I closed the notebook. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I listened to it while standing by the back door. "Hi, Mark. My name is Alan Brooks. I'm with a regional utility contractor out of Missouri. A colleague said you might be someone who understands multi-state payroll complications. We're experiencing transition issues." I didn't call back right away. I stepped outside instead. The air was cool, leaves moving lightly along the fence line. Somewhere down the street, someone was mowing their lawn. Systems fail for different reasons. Sometimes it's ego, sometimes it's speed, sometimes it's just inexperience paired with authority. But it's rarely about spreadsheets. I went back inside, poured another cup of coffee, and organized the stack of mail on the counter. Utility bill, insurance statement, grocery flyer. Ordinary life. That's what steady systems protect. On Monday, I'll probably return Alan's call. Not to rescue anything dramatically, just to listen. Ask a few questions, maybe suggest steps. Step 1, stabilize the data. Step 2, verify the source. Step 3, slow down. Most problems aren't solved by doing more. They're solved by doing things in the right order. I don't feel victorious about what happened last week. I feel aligned. The server room hum is steady again. The crews are working. The deposits clear when they should. That's enough. If you stayed with me through this story, I appreciate it. These things aren't loud when they're handled correctly. They're quiet. If you found value in it, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps this channel grow into a steady place for stories like this. And I'm always curious, what city are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments. I read more of them than you might think. 2 other stories are on your screen now, both about moments where patience mattered more than reaction. You might enjoy those next. Thanks for listening.